What's going on, everybody? Best time of the year. I'm not talking just about Christmas. We got Steelers Ravens part two on tap. Rare Saturday game. Pittsburgh's traveling to Baltimore. Got a gauntlet of a schedule to finish the season. 3 games, 10, 11 days, something like that. Pretty crazy. But obviously, two very familiar teams with one another. Definitely want to talk through a lot of facets of this matchup, some things that have changed, maybe some things that have stayed the same since they last squared off early in the season around November. Just before we get rolling, if you guys would, just make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop me a comment. All that stuff is greatly appreciated on my end. Also, let me know your all's predictions for this game. Steelers, I think, are 6.5-point underdogs in this one. So let me know if you guys think they can pull off the upset. Are you worried about the result of this one? You confident? How you guys feeling? I sincerely appreciate it. Just before we get into the injury kind of roundup for this matchup and get into kind of the back and forth, just kind of want to talk a little bit about Deontay Johnson, who just got released, because I know there's going to be people asking. A lot of people hitting me up in my DMs, on comments, on Twitter. I'm not really sure if the Steelers will put in a claim for him. He was just recently released. Johnson only played like 30-something snaps in Baltimore. Both sides really felt like they needed a fresh start in the offseason. That was really understandable from both parties. I felt like don't really know 100% of where the organization kind of stands with him. But I also will say that like both sides could potentially be desperate enough to where they could find their way back to one another. I don't really have a strong take on like what they should. I would be kind of, if they should bring him in, I would be kind of surprised if they did. But either way, like I said, I don't have really a strong opinion either way. But yeah, just kind of a unique kind of fall from grace for Deontay just over the past, several months. He went from being like one of the potentially heralded guys in this free agency class to now like probably having to take some type of prove it deal to kind of rebuild his reputation. But yeah, that's kind of my take on that. Just like I don't really know one way or the other. I think the Steelers could obviously use receiver help, but there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that kind of plays into that stuff. But from an injury perspective, some good news, some not so good news. Pickens, Elliott are going to miss this one. Both those guys have already been declared out. Sounds like TJ Watt's going to play. He doesn't have an injury designation. Like what percentage he's going to play at is kind of like a little bit more up in the air. Sounds like Ogunjobi's going to be able to give it a go as well. Dante Jackson's really probably the biggest question mark in this one. He's listed as questionable. He's had some back stuff pop up. He missed like the second half of the game last week. Dante's kind of been like in and out. Like he hasn't missed a ton of like games or anything like that this season, but he's missed like snaps in a lot of the games. So just in terms of like what's going to happen out there, is it going to be, is Jackson going to be able to go and get through 4 quarters? Is it a situation where like they're going to have to turn to James Pierre at some point? Could they give Corey Trice a helmet? That's kind of a question that like I would want to know the answer to, is like, if Jackson's not going to be able, if you don't feel confident that he's going to be able to get through like 4 quarters, you definitely want to have Trice active just to give you another body out there on the perimeter. How that plays out will be really interesting. But from the Ravens perspective too, like they've got quite a few injuries. Obviously I already mentioned like they let Deontay Johnson go. They released him, but also Rashad Bateman was in a boot as of yesterday. Kind of crazy. They're listing him as questionable, but I don't really know like what that really means. Like if he's how is he questionable if he's in a boot? But they're definitely down some playmakers on that side of the ball. So going to be really interesting to take a look at this kind of matchup. But if you just look at this thing like from a George Pickens perspective, kind of wanted to go over just some of the splits, like when George is like on and off the field. They're pretty drastic, as you would imagine. Like if you watch the games, you pretty much like feel his impact or his absence, if you will. Pittsburgh's averaging 8.1 yards per attempt when he's on the field. That figure drops all the way to 6.2 yards per attempt when he's off. With Pickens, they're 11th in yards per play, 18th in success rate, but they're dead last in both those categories without him. So obviously the sample size isn't anything crazy. I think it's up to like 150 snaps with him off the field now, but it's pretty obvious like how less, threatening they feel without him. And that's what I wrote before the season. I felt like he was their most important player offensively, not just because I thought that he was going to take a decent jump forward, which I think he has from an on-field perspective. He's a very uniquely talented individual, but just like the players that they had around him or behind him on the receiver depth chart was pretty concerning to me. And I think that you've kind of felt those concerns just over the course of the season, especially like last week when he wasn't out there. Philly's a really good defense, but if you remember, like when I was doing the preview for last week, it was kind of tough to figure out angles on how they were going to attack that unit, because they were playing as good of ball as really anyone in the NFL. And like the Steelers just didn't really have like matchup advantages at any one spot. So it's just kind of how it is. Obviously the offense wasn't like functional without him at all last week. So we saw that in the first matchup against the Ravens. He had like 8 catches, I think 89 yards, but they didn't move the ball very well in that one either. They only scored like 18 points. The numbers like Russ didn't play well in that one, but I think it'd be foolish to frame it as like, how do you replace that production? Knowing the guys that they have on the roster, just can they piece it up enough to where like they can give him time to get back, whether that's against Kansas City or maybe that's against Cincinnati, whatever that looks like. But it doesn't have to be pretty. Just find a way to get the dub, man. But I'm definitely concerned. Honestly, really bummed out about that overall. Not just like him getting hurt, but just more so because like I was really excited to see what this kind of stretch would look like with him, because I felt like we were going to get to like learn a lot about the team. I've been doing these kind of like quarterly recaps. Didn't get to it this week just because I ran out of real estate on the week. But one of those things that I was kind of starting off those podcast type episodes with is like hypothetical questions, like what I'm most excited about, what I'm most concerned about. What I was most excited about was just like figuring out. Or like more than anything is just figuring out, ways to try to win the division. I think I'm excited about the fact that it's like week 16 and the Steelers have an opportunity to clinch the AFC North on the road in Baltimore. This felt like a team that was probably going to be competing for the wild card, like coming into the year. Like I was fairly optimistic that they would be able to push for a playoff spot, but I would say I never really imagined. I didn't really think that this result was in the cards, that they were going to have a chance to secure, the divisional crown with 2 weeks left in the season. So huge opportunity in front of them to be able to do that. Beginning a home playoff game is obviously huge. It would be something that I'd be really excited about from a fan perspective. I know you guys would as well, but it's a huge opportunity ahead of them. Steelers, Ravens, always a fun time. So, just talking a little bit about the Ravens defense specifically, they've undergone this like huge, crazy transition. Really started in that first Steelers game. They've made some personnel, some scheme changes. Kyle Hamilton playing more deep safety now. They've transitioned Marlon Humphrey more to the slot. They got Nate Wiggins out there playing outside. They've also changed linebackers. So I thought it was cool to hear like Tomlin acknowledge that this looks more like a Dean Pease style defense. Dean Pease, like former Ravens defensive coordinator. He was apparently like brought in to like do, I guess, some maybe like consulting type work for them. And like they ended up switching a lot of the things that they're doing on the back end. But, you look at like since week 10, week 11, they're like 6th in drop back success rate. And they're just not giving up as many explosive plays. And I felt like that was really their struggles early in the season. That's when we did the first preview. I was like, you can throw the ball all the way down the field against this team, because they bust a lot of assignments. They're just giving up a ton of big plays. Like that hasn't really been the case since then. They did a good job keeping the lid on some of those go balls and fades that Russ was trying to hit in the first matchup. But it's definitely more like too high shell base. They changed the picture a lot post snap. They're heavy in disguise rate. They don't blitz like hardly at all, but they do a lot of like sim pressure. So they're still going to bring forward, but they're going to make you sort out like who's who in the zoo and like how you're going to pick it up correctly. So, how can they attack that? Baltimore's been pretty excellent against the run this season in general, but especially against like multi-tight end sets. They've only allowed like 3.2 yards per carry, like when you're out there in two tight end sets. In their last matchup, the run game had some brief flashes like early in the game. They had a couple like nice like split zone runs. They popped an outside zone play to the left side of the field, I think on like the first possession. But overall, like a 33% rushing success rate. That's obviously not going to be good enough to get this thing done tomorrow, in my opinion. Kind of opens up like a broader discussion that I wanted to have about the run game. This was something that I was going to hit on, like if I was able to get to the podcast earlier this week. But man, I'm just like pretty underwhelmed about just like the overall progress of this unit. Coming into the season, I talked about like, just the way the schedule laid out, there was just a lot of different things that were changing, right? You got a new offensive coordinator, you're inserting like new players into the scheme, especially like up front in the trenches. My thought process with that was like, okay, just piece it together over the first half of the year, see what works, try to get these guys to gel. And then like, hopefully like by the back half of the season, you want to be able to look at particularly like this offensive line, this run game, and say like, okay, we've got a top 10, top 15-ish style, rushing attack with the offensive line that's trending in the right direction with a lot of young players. And like this can kind of be the calling card or the identity, if you will, of the offense. And I do think that they have a really run first identity, because you look at the numbers and like they run the ball all the time. Like, I mean, there's only the Eagles are the only team that runs it more than the Steelers. They're just not very good at it, man, to be honest with you. They just really haven't, like their numbers like have really died tailed off a little bit since like Russ has taken over, but like it's not really like they weren't running the ball very well with Fields in there either. I just think that we've kind of arrived at this unfortunate conclusion that the scheme doesn't really fit the personnel that they've got. They're running a lot of like outside zone stuff, like a lot of like outside the tackles type approach. This doesn't really seem to be like what matches the guys that they have on the offense. And I think there's definitely necessary like context with that because there's some unforeseen things that you got to look at, right? Like no James Daniels, he gets hurt in the first month of the season, he's gone for the rest of the year. Obviously, you get a prospect that I was really excited about, Troy Fautanu, in the first round of the draft. He falls all the way to you down to the 20s, and like he only played like a handful of snaps due to injury. So there's definitely that element of it, like that you couldn't really predict. But I just think the right side of the offensive line just been a real weak spot at times, like in the run game specifically. I think Frazier's been outstanding. I really think he's playing at a super high level, like a top like 5 to 8 center type of level as a rookie, and that's really encouraging, man. Like he's been even better than I anticipated coming in, and I really love what like him and McCormick have brought from a physicality and from a finishing standpoint. Both those guys are real pests, and I think that they would be guys that you would hate to play against. But at the same time, like McCormick, 4th round rookie, taking multiple jumps in competition. He's just having a really difficult time like in the run game right now. And it really stems back to like his pad level. I don't really think it's a play strength issue, to be honest with you. But there's so many times like he's just getting jolted back off the line of scrimmage, tossed aside really easily because he almost like plays straight up. I highlighted this play in the film room I did earlier this week, and I screenshotted it on Twitter. But like there are plays where like Jordan Davis, who's the Eagles defensive tackle, he's 6'7" and some change. And I believe in like he's getting under McCormick's pads, and it's just like it's so consistent with him because like he just has no bend to him, and it really hurts his ability to sustain blocks. And then like Jones, like another thing is like I am pleased with like projects like slight improvement over the course of the season. He hasn't been like the complete liability he was like before the bye. I think like the play is like kind of steadied out. We haven't really seen like the improvement that we're kind of hoping for coming into the season necessarily. But he hasn't been a complete train wreck. But I think like the hand placement with him is just so wide, man. Like on every single rep, it's like he's just trying to bear hug guys. And that's a big reason why like he can't move anybody off the ball and he can't sustain blocks like at all. And, I think it's just really frustrating watching that stuff, along like when you couple in like just the amount of mental errors that this group has. I mean, there's just so many guys just running through. Harris, I wrote a piece on Steelers Now this week about it, but Steelers running backs have been hit at or behind the line of scrimmage on half their carries this year. And it's the second highest rate in the entire NFL. And like you feel it when you watch it because there's so many times where like they're just getting blasted in the backfield. And it really goes back to like technique stuff with the offensive line. Like I said, there's a schematic angle to it. There's some personnel stuff, but maybe it's not this week. And I know like we're getting really late into the season, so it's kind of hard to see things drastically change it, but I'd like to see them incorporate like some more gap scheme stuff. Harris is averaging like 3.3 yards per carry outside the tackles this year, like according to Next Gen. Like that's pretty rough. The Ravens are a really tough defense. And you look at some of the teams that have had success against them in the past, like this season, it's been more out of like some spread stuff, some more shotgun base, maybe some runs with some pullers. You look at counter, look at dart. I specifically think about like Tampa, Phillies had moderate success against them. But those are also two teams with great offensive lines that they can really lean on. And like, I don't think Pittsburgh's quite at that level. The reason why I mentioned the puller stuff is like Roquan hasn't been quite as impactful this year in coverage, but he's still like a good defender. I do think like the big thing with Roquan, the thing that he's always struggled with is just like pullers and taking on blocks at the point of attack. He's not the biggest guy. So it's kind of a way that you can attack him a little bit in the run game. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely frustrated and a little bit underwhelmed. I think that there's a lot of reasons why this thing just quite frankly hasn't worked. I mean, they're like 23rd, I think, in rushing, or I think they're 26th in rushing success rate since Russ took over. I think they're 27th in rushing EPA per play. And it's just, they don't really have that one thing offensively outside of like just the go balls on the perimeter, which, are really good. Like Russ is a great deep ball thrower. He's held up his end of the bargain and then some, in my opinion, when Pickens has been out there on the field. That connection's been able to give them the explosive plays. But like we talked about before the season, like we needed the run game to have the efficiency element to the offense. We needed the quarterbacks to provide the explosiveness. We've got the explosive plays. Like that part's like when Pickens is out on the field, like they can create those, in my opinion. I think the numbers bear that out too. It's just the run game, like it's just not efficient enough to where they can really hang their hat on it. It's kind of frustrating, but the passing game, it might be DOA without Pickens, but Baltimore has allowed the most yards over the middle of the field this season, according to Sports Info Solutions, especially in like that like 10 to 20 intermediate area of the field. It's not particularly where Russ like loves to target necessarily, but he's going to have to do it in my opinion this game. Try to get some stuff up the seams. Try to see if you can use Pat Freiermuth. Keep in mind, obviously those numbers can be a little noisy just because of the amount of changes that this Baltimore defense has undergone over the course of the season. But they've also shuffled, like I said, new linebacker in there. Trenton Simpson's been benched. They're playing Malik Harrison in there now. But Freiermuth, their best receiver on the roster, they got to find some creative ways to get him to rock more consistently and not just in the red zone or scramble drill situations. I touched on this a little bit on Twitter, but they were so predictable last week in terms of like the directions that they were trying to attack Philly on offense. So like when they were in the gun, they threw the ball 23 of 25 times. When they were under center, they ran the ball 13 of 16 times. Like when Pat Freiermuth's not on the field, it's almost always a run. So they have these like built-in like tendencies that teams are very clearly aware of, like coming into the week. And like you've got to be able to mix and match a little bit more than that and keep teams off balance. And I don't think Arthur Smith did a very good job of that last week. I thought that Terrell Austin actually had a good game plan, which we'll talk about the defense. I thought his game plan was really solid. I know I said that the post game too, but I thought the offensive game plan left a lot to be desired, to be honest with you. But speaking of that, we got to find a way to get some explosive plays without Pickens. It's going to be tough, but you're going to need 4 or 5 of those bare minimum. I think they only had 2 last week. Just didn't put up enough points. You got to find a way to get them. It's not going to be easy, but going to need Calvin. Potentially, he's probably their best option in that regard. But, just looking at things from a defensive perspective, Lamar playing at the MVP level right now, only 8 turnover-worthy plays all season long, 37 touchdowns. Baltimore's number 1 passing offense against zone coverages in the NFL. We know the Steelers like to play a lot of cover 3. It's a lot of middle field close. The Steelers had a lot of success, though, playing zone coverage against Lamar last time. They've switched things up against him in the past. They played like some heavy man, some blitz stuff, some zone stuff. They've really tinkered with their game plans specific to when they're playing this team. But I thought like Minka, Patrick Queen were excellent in their zone drops last time around, especially in the middle of the field, just clouding the middle where he really likes to attack. You think about all those deep overs he likes to hit, those deep dig routes, things like that. They took those away and then they tackled the catch whenever he did check the ball down. But anytime we talk about the Steelers, it's always going to start with like them dominating up front. Like they do have a talent advantage in this one against the Ravens offensive line. TJ Watt is going to be banged up. So like, how's he going to corner like as a speed rusher off that ankle? Is he going to be able to push off enough? Does he switch up his approach a little bit, or do they try to move him around a little bit more? Or do they just leave him out there and say like, hopefully his gravity will take some of the pressure off the other guys? But Highsmith, he missed that last matchup. Going to need a big game from him against Ronnie Stanley. Of course, Cam Hayward's playing at an incredible level. But just, maintaining good pass rush lane integrity is huge. They've done a good job of that really all season long, to be honest with you. The screen game, they've done a decent job of that as well. So I like where they match up in that regard. They've been like the league's best team, I think, in terms of preventing scramble yardage. And obviously that's a huge part when you're going up against a guy like Lamar Jackson, because just his straight line acceleration, just really unique to the position. There's just not really many guys like that can cover that much grass in that amount of time. When he was pressured last matchup, he held the ball for over 4 seconds. With Lamar, he's going to try to run around and create. He doesn't like to give up on plays unnecessarily, but he was 4 for 12 on 14 dropbacks for just 34 total yards. So, I mean, they did a fantastic job. And a big part of that is just make sure, like when he leaves the pocket, obviously you got to be prepared for him to take off, but you have to make sure that you're plastering to receivers and having good awareness about where guys are, because, he does have pretty good chemistry with his receivers in terms of like what they do in the scramble drill, and they've got their rules down and stuff like that. That's a big way that they, take advantage of undisciplined defenses. But I think the Steelers did a good job on the first matchup, so hopefully that continues in this one. But, no Rashad Bateman in terms of the passing offense. That's going to be unique to this matchup. Bateman's kind of their outside, like press beating type of player. So like Zay Flowers is more of like their slot receiver. So they are going to be down some guys on the perimeter. That kind of leads into the conversation of like, if Trice or Pierre have to play on the perimeter and you want to live in those middle field close looks, like, can they hold up one-on-one? I think that you would like to think they could. Without Bateman in there, they're going to be going on up against like Tylen Wallace, guys like that. Tez Walker, the rookie wide receiver from North Carolina. But that's, one thing about Lamar too is like when you play a lot of like single high, Lamar is not a guy that likes to throw like necessarily like the deep ball down the field in terms of like just throwing a bunch of fades on the sideline. That's not really like how he likes to attack. So that is like some good news as well. But just their two playmakers in this one, it's gonna be really noteworthy on how they defend those guys. Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers. I just like looked it up. I don't use passer rating very often as a stat, but I thought this is pretty crazy. Lamar's got 138 passer rating this year when targeting Mark Andrews. 31 of his 45 catches have went for first downs. Like as long as this guy's been around the league, and like he's had some good games, some not so good games against the Steelers in the past. I think more so of the latter. But this, like when you got to have it moments, that's where Lamar likes to go with the ball. So you got to be aware of that. I anticipate the Steelers are probably going to have a similar defensive approach defensively with Mika playing more in the box this week without Elliott on the field. Probably going to see some more KZ playing in the deep middle. In terms of like what they do in terms of like slot reps and things like that, it'll probably just depend on if they're going to play some zone, if they're going to play man, or what that looks like, the distribution of labor. But how they defend Zay Flowers in the slot is going to be crucial to their success. I thought Porter had some good man-to-man reps on him last time they matched up, but Flowers is a really shifty guy. He's really, really quick. The best two things that he does is like catching the ball on like deep over routes, those runaway routes where he can use like his straight line speed and acceleration. And then he's really good at like breaking off like deep outbreakers outside the numbers. So those are two of the ways that they like to get him involved. But just in terms of like slowing him down, like that's a huge part. It's like defending the middle of the field, like just close the middle of the field. And like, you take that away, you can make Baltimore feel a little bit dangerous in the passing element. But obviously Derrick Henry having a huge year. I think he's second in rushing yards. He's second in the NFL in yards after contact, averaging over like 3.5 yards after contact generated per carry. 18 rushes of 15 plus yards. So those explosive plays, like they get explosives through the air, they get them in the ground game, and they get them with Lamar's legs. So it's like it's a difficult offense to take those away. You want to try to make sure that you can make them or force them to like matriculate the offense down the field, go on those like 10 to 12 play drives instead of like letting them just light you up with quick hitters. But those 18 rushes of 15 or more yards is third most in the NFL. So pretty crazy. Cam Hayward stat, I mentioned him playing like an incredible level, but I feel like I'm like the main person like campaigning for Cam Hayward's Defensive Player of the Year campaign now on social media and stuff. It's bizarre to me that he's not getting the clout, especially like on a good defense, on a playoff team, a team that could clinch the AFC North this weekend. It's just bizarre to me. But the Steelers are holding teams at 3.4 yards per carry when he's on the field. That number balloons all the way up to 5.6 yards per carry when he's off. So going to need a heavy snap count game from Cam Hayward. And also, I just think it's like relatively obvious that the Steelers are going to have to force some turnovers in this one. It would be shocking to me if the Steelers offense just really found their footing and looked good in this game, just because of like not having Pickens is just such a big deal. I mean, they had him last time and they didn't move the ball very well, and it's gonna be tough sledding for sure. So you're gonna need probably 2 or 3 turnovers. They got him last time. I mean, they forced a fumble early on Derrick Henry. Peyton Wilson makes that crazy play on the wheel route, ripping the ball out. I think it was like Justin Hill's hands to get the interception. Like you're going to need those plays. You're probably going to need some special teams impact. So can you take a punt back to the crib? Calvin Austin, like, can he make a big play for you there? Their punter has a huge leg. He can really boom the ball. Can you get a punt block? That was my bold prediction on the Steelers afternoon drive, was that if the Steelers did win, it would be the result of like a Miles Killebrew punt block, which I think he actually blocked one last year too against the Ravens. So it's kind of funny, but that's kind of the formula. These games are almost always like 20 points or lower. They're 1-score games. Like you guys know how I feel about like Tomlin and Harbaugh. And like I consistently say that like in those like tight games like that, I just have more faith in a Tomlin coach team than I do a Harbaugh coach team. I just think the proof bears that out. We have so much sample size that really reflects that too. The Steelers have won 8 of the last 9. I think this was going to be like probably one of their toughest tests in terms of like winning, just because of it's on the road. They haven't played Lamar at Baltimore very often. I think maybe only like one time throughout his career, but just without Pickens, it's going to be tough for sure. So you're going to need some things to go your way, but best case scenario is like you can make this thing ugly and try to pull out some magic in the end in the fourth quarter. And really that's all that matters at this point. Like screw style points. As much as I like to talk about like the X's and O's and the numbers associated with the game and all that stuff. Like screw scout style points. You just got to find a way to get the division crown and make sure you get a home playoff game to secure your playoff positioning, if you will. But the last thing I'll mention is Steelers do have a huge kicking advantage. Justin Tucker has been terrible this season, one of the worst kickers in the league, if not the worst. He's only hit 70% of his field goals this season. Boz is having an all-pro caliber season. We saw in the first matchup, Boz, I think, kicked 6 field goals, something like that. So not a huge fan of kicking field goals in general, but if the Steelers do have to do it at any point this season or in this matchup, I do trust Boz more than I trust Tucker at this point of the year. So low scoring games, one possession games, kicking, special teams really matters, man. So we'll see what that looks like. But as always, I really appreciate your all's continued support for the channel. And I will talk to you guys. We got a Saturday game at 4 o'clock. I also have to work that night. So I will probably upload the recap early Sunday morning. But it should be available to you guys probably I'll put it out for members first and then everybody else probably 9 or 10 a.m. so that you guys will have several hours to watch it back or whatever before the Sunday slate. But got a lot of good games on this weekend. So we got some games up against some playoff teams and things like that are going to be interesting to watch. Also, we got some good college football playoff games I think this weekend as well. So I'm really excited about that. But as always, please make sure that you enjoy the weekend. If you're doing holiday festivities, hope everybody enjoys themselves. So I will talk to you guys very soon. Peace and love.